The world stopped spinning for James D. Burns on a Tuesday afternoon on the corner of 5th and Madison, not because of a rival's bullet or a federal ambush, but because of a single, tarnished copper penny offered to him by a tiny hand. He was kneeling on the concrete sidewalk, his $1,000 suit pressed against the dirty pavement, his hands extended toward a little girl no more than 4 years old. She stood before him in a bright red shirt and dark pants, a pink bow clipped to her short dark hair, holding out 1 penny with the solemnity of someone offering their last breath. Around them, the city continued its relentless rhythm, pedestrians flowing past like water around stones, car horns bleating, the smell of street vendor pretzels mixing with exhaust fumes, but in the small space between the crime boss and the child, time had frozen. "I need you to marry my mom, sir," she'd just said, and the words hung in the autumn air, impossible and absolute. James D. Burns, the silent CEO, the man whose name made prosecutors hesitate and rival syndicates reconsider, stared at the penny in her small palm and felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years. Complete, disorienting shock. Subscribe to see where this story goes next. And say hi in the comments. We love knowing where our viewers are from. Your support makes more stories possible. But let's rewind. Because this impossible moment began 3 hours earlier, when a little girl named Adele E. Smith watched her mother cry over an eviction notice and decided to find a king. 1 copper penny. That's what it cost to change everything. Adele had found it under the radiator that morning, while her mother sobbed quietly in the kitchen over the paper that said they had 30 days. The penny was warm from the heating pipe, Lincoln's face worn almost smooth, dated 2019. She'd held it up to the weak sunlight filtering through their apartment window and made a decision no child should have to make. She needed a king. And everyone knew where kings could be found. The city sidewalk stretched before her like a river of concrete and strangers. It was late afternoon, the sun already sinking behind the buildings, casting long shadows across 5th Avenue. The air held that particular November chill that cut through thin jackets, and Adele's jacket was very thin, outgrown months ago, her wrists extending past the cuffs. She clutched the penny in her small fist, and walked with the careful determination of someone following a plan they didn't fully understand, but believed in completely. She'd heard Mrs. Chin say it. Every Tuesday, like clockwork, he visits that corner. Pays respect to something, someone. Even kings have ghosts. 5th and Madison. Tuesday afternoon. That's where she'd find him. James D. Burns stood on the corner where his brother had died 17 years ago, a ritual he performed once a month when the variables aligned, when his security could sanitize the route, when his schedule permitted exactly 30 minutes of exposure, when he could afford to be almost human. The street corner looked nothing like it had in 2007. The bodega where Tommy had bled out was now an artisanal coffee shop. The payphone where James had called for help that never came fast enough was gone, replaced by a bike share station. The city had paved over the blood and built expensive things on top of memory. But James remembered. Every crack in the sidewalk. Every angle of the late afternoon light. He wore his armor even here. Black suit tailored to conceal the weapon at his spine, white shirt crisp despite the wind. His dark hair slicked back with the same precision he applied to everything. The tattoos on his neck and hands, roses and thorns, geometric patterns that told stories in ink, marked him as something other than the businessmen hurrying past with their briefcases and their normal problems. He stood still while the city flowed around him, and people instinctively gave him space. Something in his presence, the controlled violence in his stillness, the authority in his posture, made strangers choose different paths across the intersection. Control the variables, and you control the outcome. Today, he was the variable. Exposed. Vulnerable in a way he permitted only in this specific place, at this specific time, for exactly 30 minutes once a month. His security was there. Marcus across the street pretending to read a newspaper, Valdez in the black sedan idling at the corner, Thompson browsing a store window with perfect sight lines to his position, but he was still exposed. Still almost human. Pedestrians streamed past, caught in their own orbit. A mother dragged a protesting toddler toward the subway. 2 students laughed over a shared phone. A delivery driver argued with someone on his headset in rapid Spanish. Ordinary lives, unfolding in predictable patterns. The city's 10,000 daily dramas playing out on the same stage where his had once ended in blood. James checked his watch. Swiss-made, understated, worth more than most people's monthly rent, and calculated the time remaining. 15 minutes before his next obligation. Before he returned to the fortress of his tower and the machinery of his empire. Across the street, he noticed a young couple at a cafe table on the sidewalk, bundled in scarves, hands wrapped around coffee cup. They leaned close, talking quietly, occasionally laughing. The easy intimacy of people who trusted the world not to punish happiness. Simple. Ordinary. Impossible. The observation triggered that familiar hollowness, the ache for a life never lived, for the man he might have become if Tommy had lived, if different choices had led to different corners, different outcomes. The moment was interrupted by movement in his peripheral vision. A small figure. Far too small. Moving toward him with halting, careful step. Time seemed to slow. James's trained eyes catalogued details automatically. Female child, approximately 4 years old, alone, no adult guardian visible. Red long-sleeve shirt, clean but faded. Dark pants. Worn sneakers, too small, she walked with the slight discomfort of feet pinched by outgrown shoes. A bright pink bow in her short dark hair, absurdly cheerful against the gray urban landscape. She was walking directly toward him. Not past him, not around him, toward him, with the kind of determined trajectory that suggested purpose. Across the street, Marcus straightened slightly, hand moving toward his concealed radio. In the sedan, Valdez's posture shifted. Both waiting for James's signal, for the subtle gesture that would send them into motion. But James didn't signal. He watched. The little girl's appearance told a story he'd learned to read in the language of desperation. The clean but worn clothes spoke of poverty with dignity. No jacket despite the November cold meant money too tight for replacement. No parent meant either abandonment or choice, and the determination in her small shoulders suggested choice. She stopped exactly 6 feet away from him. Close enough to speak. Far enough to flee. Her hand was clenched in a small fist, clutching something. Her dark eyes, far too serious for someone who should still believe in fairy tales, fixed on him with unwavering focus. James D. Burns had stared down cartel lieutenants across negotiating tables. Had locked eyes with federal prosecutors who'd promised him prison. Had given orders that ended lives without his pulse quickening. Yet something in this child's fearless approach unsettled him profoundly. Perhaps it was the absence of terror where terror should exist. Any adult approaching him uninvited carried fear like a scent, in their breathing, their posture, the way they couldn't quite meet his eyes. But this child looked at him directly, as if she'd already decided he would listen. A determination no 4-year-old should need to possess. Mr. Burns. Her voice was small but steady, carried on the cold wind. Are you Mr. James D. Burns? The question hung between them, dangerous and absurd, spoken on a public sidewalk where pedestrians passed within feet, where his security watched with hands near weapons, where saying yes was an admission that should never be made to strangers. He could lie. Should lie. A simple, wrong person, delivered in a cold tone, and she'd retreat. The same dismissal he'd given countless others foolish enough to approach him in public. But something, that hollowness from 30 seconds ago, or simple curiosity about what would drive a child to approach the most dangerous man in the city, made him answer truthfully. I am. Relief and fear warred across her small face. She took one step closer. Then another. Until she stood just 4 feet away, close enough that he could see her hand trembling. And then she did something that changed everything. She opened her fist, revealing a single tarnished penny in her small palm, and extended it toward him. But she was so small, and he was so tall, and the distance between them was not just physical but fundamental, the chasm between power and powerlessness, between the man who owned the city and the child who had nothing but one copper coin. James D. Burns made a choice. He knelt. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to the dirty sidewalk, his expensive suit pressing against concrete that had seen 10,000 footsteps, gum wrappers, and the residue of urban life. His knees touched pavement. He brought himself down to her level, his hands extending toward her, open and empty. Around them, pedestrians slowed, sensing something unusual. Across the street, Marcus's hand froze on his radio, shocked into stillness. In the sedan, Valdez sat forward, disbelieving. Because James D. Burns did not kneel. Not for senators, not for prosecutors, not for the old Italian bosses who thought they still ran the city. He certainly didn't kneel on public sidewalk. Yet here he was, eye level with a 4-year-old girl with a pink bow and a penny. "What's this for?" he asked quietly, his voice stripped of its usual cold authority, replaced by something almost gentle. Adele's hand steadied. She looked at him, really looked at him, and seemed to find something in his face that gave her courage. "I need to hire you," she said, her voice solemn as a judge. "I have 1 penny. It's everything I have. But I need you to marry my mom, sir." Which brings us back to now. To the frozen moment on the corner of 5th and Madison. To the crime boss kneeling on concrete, hands extended. To the little girl offering everything she had. To pedestrians stopping, staring, phones coming out to capture the impossible image. To his security detail paralyzed with shock because their boss, the silent CEO, the man who commanded empires, had just knelt before a child. James looked at the penny in her small palm. 1 cent worthless to anyone else. Everything to her. "She cries at night," Adele continued, and now her voice did waver. "And there's never enough food and the heat doesn't work. But if she had you, she wouldn't cry anymore. Because you're the king. Everyone says so. And kings can fix anything." She extended the penny closer, her small hand trembling in the cold air. "Please. I have 1 penny." For a long moment James didn't move. Didn't speak. Around them, the city held its breath, or seemed to, in that small bubble of impossible stillness. Then, slowly, James D. Burns extended his hand and let the little girl drop the warm copper coin into his tattooed palm. His fingers closed around it, careful not to touch her skin, the penny small and absurd against his scarred knuckles. He looked at it, then at her. Then, for the first time in 15 years, something that might have been a smile, or its ghost, touched the corner of his mouth. "Tell me your name," he said quietly. "Adele. Adele E. Smith." "And your mother's name?" "Clara. Clara Smith." James stood slowly, the penny clutched in his fist, rising to his full height while Adele watched with desperate hope. He slipped the coin into his pocket, felt it settle against the silk lining of his suit. 1 penny, carried by the man who moved millions. "Adele E. Smith," he said formally, as if signing a contract. "I accept your payment. Consider me hired." Across the street, Marcus dropped his newspaper. In the sedan, Valdez swore quietly in Spanish. And on the sidewalk, witnesses with phones captured the moment a little girl paid a Mafia boss 1 penny to marry her mother, and he said yes. The world had just changed. James extended his hand toward Adele, not to shake, but in a gesture of formal partnership. "Now tell me everything about your mother, and then I'll take you home." The black sedan moved through late afternoon traffic with practiced efficiency, Valdez navigating the city streets while James sat in the back seat, 1 hand in his pocket, fingers closed around a single copper penny. Adele sat beside him, small and quiet, her worn sneakers not quite touching the floor, the bright pink bow in her hair catching light from passing street lamps that were just beginning to flicker on against the coming dusk. She'd told him everything in that peculiar way children told stories, Circular, honest, devastating in its simplicity. The apartment with the broken heat. The eviction notice. Her mother working 2 jobs and still crying over bills at the kitchen table. The way Clara smiled for her daughter even when her hands shook from exhaustion. "She never stops smiling for me," Adele had said. "But at night when she thinks I'm sleeping, she cries. Real quiet. Like she doesn't want to bother anyone, even when no one's listening." James had listened with the same focused attention he gave to intelligence briefings that shaped his empire's next move. Every detail catalogued. Every fact assessed. The child was 4 years old and could already read the architecture of adult desperation with stunning clarity. Now, as the sedan turned onto the street Adele had directed them to, a neighborhood where buildings leaned tired against each other and hope came in lottery tickets, James pulled the penny from his pocket and examined it under the cabin's soft light. 1 cent minted 2019. Worth nothing. Worth everything. The metal was warm from being carried, Lincoln's profile worn almost smooth by countless transactions, by the 10,000 hands that had held it before a little girl decided it was payment enough to hire a king. The antithesis of his wealth. He owned shipping containers full of merchandise worth millions. His watch cost more than 2 million of these pennies. The sedan he sat in represented 30 million. Yet this single coin, this tarnished, worthless piece of copper, felt heavier than any contract he'd ever signed. Because Adele had offered it with absolute faith. With the solemnity of someone binding her fate to his word. A transaction completed in innocence, before witnesses, on a public street where his security had watched in shock as he knelt and accepted employment from a 4-year-old. A contract. Absurd. Binding. Accepted. James slipped the penny back into his pocket, feeling it settle against the silk lining, and pulled out his phone. 1 text, sent encrypted to his head of security, Clara Smith. Full background. Employment, finances, residence history, known associate. Also the daughter, Adele Eve Smith, age 4. Medical, school records, everything. Discreet. Complete report in 3 hours. Priority absolute. The response came within seconds. "Sir, the girl from the street?" James's reply was immediate and final. "The contract is accepted. Execute." He pocketed the phone and glanced at Adele, who was watching the familiar streets pass by with growing nervousness, her small hands twisting together. "Mr. Burns." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What happens now?" James looked at her. This child who'd decided he could fix anything, who'd paid him everything she had and trusted him to keep his word. The silent CEO, the man whose reputation was built on ruthless calculation and ice-cold control, felt something shift in the careful architecture of his world. "Now," he said quietly, "I meet your mother. And then I keep my promise." The sedan turned onto her street, and James D. Burns prepared to fulfill the strangest contract he'd ever accepted. For the price of 1 copper penny. The report arrived at midnight, delivered by Marcus in a manila folder that contained everything about Clara Smith's life reduced to facts and figures. James read it in his penthouse office, the city sprawling below him like a circuit board of lights, while the penny sat on his desk like a paperweight made of promise. Clara Marie Smith, age 28. Degree in graphic design from a state school, graduated with honors despite working full-time. Currently employed at 2 jobs. Administrative assistant at a dental office during the day, freelance design work at night. Total income, barely above poverty line. Debts. Medical bills from Adele's birth, student loans, 2 maxed credit cards used for groceries and utilities. Eviction notice, 30 days. Criminal record, none. Credit score, destroyed by circumstances, not choices. But it was the character assessment that made James pause. Former employers uniformly described her as proud, talented, and fiercely independent. She'd refused charity from her church. Turned down government assistance despite qualifying. Returned a GoFundMe her coworkers had started without her knowledge. A woman drowning who refused every lifeline because she couldn't bear to be saved by pity. James closed the folder and began orchestrating. 3 days later, Clara Smith received a call from Burns Logistics offering her a graphic design contract. Rebranding their corporate materials, $60,000 for 6 months' work. The woman on the phone explained they'd found her portfolio online, were impressed by her clean aesthetic. The meeting was scheduled at a cafe 2 blocks from her apartment. Neutral ground. Convenient. Unthreatening. James arrived early, positioned at a corner table, laptop open to legitimate business documents. When Clara walked in, dark hair pulled back, professional clothes that were neat but worn, exhaustion visible in the set of her shoulders despite her straight posture. He waited exactly 90 seconds before looking up, as if noticing her by chance. "Ms. Smith." He stood, extending a hand. "James Burns. Thank you for meeting me." Her handshake was firm, but her eyes were wary, the same dark eyes her daughter had, carrying the same too heavy knowledge. She sat across from him, spine straight, chin lifted in a posture that said she was here as an equal, not a supplicant. "Mr. Burns." Her voice was steady, professional. "Your offer is generous. Almost too generous for a simple rebranding project." She was already suspicious, already reading the variables. James smiled slightly, recognizing a worthy opponent. This would be more complicated than he'd anticipated. Clara let him talk for exactly 7 minutes. She listened to his pitch about the rebranding project, the timeline, the creative freedom he was offering. She watched him slide the contract across the cafe table, watched his tattooed hands, incongruous against the expensive suit, gesture to the compensation clause. $60,000. 6 months. Then she sat back, arms crossed, and said quietly, "When did you meet my daughter?" James went still. That particular stillness that made boardrooms fall silent and rivals reconsider their positions. "Excuse me." "My daughter, Adele." Clara's voice remained calm, but her eyes had gone hard. "Small girl, 4 years old, has a habit of talking to strangers despite everything I've taught her about danger. When did she approach you?" The variables shifted. James recalculated, recognizing he'd underestimated his opponent. "Tuesday afternoon. 5th and Madison." "And what did she offer you?" Clara leaned forward, her exhaustion replaced by something fiercer. "What did my baby girl try to pay you with?" For a long moment, James considered lying. Then he reached into his pocket and placed the penny on the table between them. Clara's face went white, then red. Her hands trembled as she stared at the tarnished copper coin, and when she spoke, her voice was barely controlled fury. "You took money from a 4-year-old child. And now you're here, offering me charity disguised as a job, thinking what? That I'm so desperate I won't see through it." She stood abruptly, chairs scraping against the floor. "I don't need your pity, Mr. Burns. I don't care how much power you have or how many people are afraid of you. I don't need you to save me. Your daughter seems to think otherwise." "My daughter is 4 years old." Clara's voice cracked. "She doesn't understand that men like you don't help people like us without wanting something in return. She still believes in fairy tales and kings and—" She stopped, blinking rapidly against tears she refused to let fall. "She believes a penny can buy miracles." "Maybe it can," James said quietly. "No. It can't." Clara grabbed her bag, dignity wrapped around her like armor. "Whatever arrangement you think you made with a child, consider it void. We don't need you. We'll figure it out ourselves, the way we always have." She turned to leave, and James stood, his voice stopping her at the cafe door. "I accepted a contract, Ms. Smith. I don't break contracts." Clara looked back at him, and in her eyes, James saw the same fierce determination he'd seen in her daughter's. The same pride that would rather drown than accept a hand extended in pity. "Then consider yourself fired," she said. "Keep the penny. Consider it payment for wasting your time." She walked out, spine straight, leaving James standing alone with a copper coin and the sudden, uncomfortable realization that everything he'd built his empire on, Power, money, calculated control, meant nothing to a woman who valued her pride more than survival. He picked up the penny, feeling its weight, and understood with absolute clarity. He couldn't buy Clara Smith. Which meant, for the first time in 15 years, he would have to do something he'd forgotten how to do. He would have to earn her. The heating repair truck arrived at Clara's building on a Wednesday morning, the technician explaining that an anonymous work order had been submitted for her unit. Clara stood in her doorway, arms crossed, and called James directly. The heat. Her voice was tight with restrained fury. It's November. Your daughters shouldn't be cold. A pause. It's practical, not extravagant. You can't just. I can. I did. Fire me again if you want. She didn't. And when the preschool called about Adele's art class scholarship, Clara didn't refuse that either, though her hands shook as she signed the permission form. James appeared at the dental office where she worked, ostensibly to discuss a consultation for his staff's benefits package. Dr. Morrison was thrilled. Clara was suspicious. This is transparent, she said when her boss left them alone in the consultation room. I know. James looked distinctly uncomfortable in the small space surrounded by dental posters. Have dinner with me. You and Adele. Pizza, maybe. Somewhere she'd like. Are you actually using my 4-year-old to ask me out? I don't know how else to approach you. His honesty was disarming. She's the only reason you haven't blocked my number. Clara wanted to say no. Should have said no. But Adele had been asking about Mr. King every night, and the hope in her daughter's eyes was harder to refuse than any manipulation. The pizza restaurant was chaos, children's birthday parties and arcade games and sticky tables, and James D. Burns looked profoundly out of place in his dark suit among the balloons and screaming kids. Why do you have pictures on your hands? Adele asked, studying his tattooed knuckles with intense curiosity. They're reminders, James said carefully. Of what? Of who I used to be. Do you like who you are now? James glanced at Clara, then back at Adele. I'm trying to become someone better. Good, Adele announced. Because Mom deserves better. She's the best mom in the whole world. I know, James said quietly. That's why I'm here. Over the next 3 weeks, Clara's walls crumbled in increment. Coffee conversations that stretched past her lunch break. James showing up at Adele's art show, looking absurdly out of place among the proud parents. The way he listened when Clara talked about her design work, not with polite dismissal but genuine interest. The careful distance he maintained, never pushing, never demanding more than she was willing to give. She was beginning to trust him. Beginning to believe that maybe Adele's fairy tale logic had stumbled onto something real. Then everything changed on a Saturday afternoon in the park. Adele had been playing on the swings while Clara and James sat on a nearby bench, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. James's phone rang, a specific ringtone that made his entire body go rigid. I need to take this. He stood, walking a few paces away, but his voice carried on the autumn wind. Where is he now? A pause. And the shipment? Another pause, then his voice dropped to something cold and lethal. Make the problem disappear, Marcus. Quietly. I don't care how. Just make sure no one finds anything to connect back. Adele had stopped swinging. She stood frozen, her small hands gripping the chains, staring at James with wide eyes. When he turned back, pulling at his collar in frustration, his shirt shifted, revealing a scar across his collarbone. Long, vicious, the kind left by something sharp and deliberately cruel. Clara saw it. Adele saw it. Adele, honey, Clara started, but Adele was already backing away, her face pale. You hurt people, Adele whispered, looking at James with dawning horror. You make them disappear. James knelt quickly, hands extended. Adele, it's not. Don't touch me. The little girl who'd approached him fearlessly on a street corner now looked at him like he was the monster parents warned about. You're not a king. You're the bad guy. She ran to her mother, buried her face in Clara's stomach, and began to cry. James disappeared from their lives after the park. No calls, no gifts, no appearances outside her building. Clara told herself it was better this way, safer, even as Adele cried herself to sleep asking why the king had left. Then the black SUV appeared. Clara noticed it first on Monday, idling across from Adele's preschool during pickup. Tinted windows. No plates visible. It pulled away when she stared too long, but she felt eyes tracking her retreat down the sidewalk. Tuesday, the same SUV was parked outside the dental office when she left work. Wednesday, she heard footsteps behind her on the walk home, boots on pavement that stopped when she stopped, resumed when she moved. She clutched Adele's hand tighter and walked faster. Thursday night, someone tried her apartment door at 2 a.m. Clara sat in the darkness, Adele asleep in her arms, a kitchen knife trembling in her hand, while the doorknob rattled slowly, deliberately. Testing. A voice through the door, male and amused. Tell your boyfriend the Borellis send their regards. The footsteps retreated. The building fell silent. Clara didn't sleep. Friday morning, an envelope was slipped under her door. No words, just a photograph. Adele outside her preschool, circled in red marker like a target. Clara's hands shook so hard she dropped it. She'd been so proud, so determined to protect her daughter alone, to refuse help from men who wielded power like weapons. But pride didn't stop men who broke into buildings. Independence didn't erase photographs that promised violence. Her fierce self-reliance meant nothing against people who knew where her daughter played, who'd marked her baby like prey. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and dialed the number she'd sworn she wouldn't call. James answered on the first ring. Clara. They were at my door. Her voice broke. Someone, they have pictures of Adele, they said. Where are you right now? Home. We're home, but James, I can't. I don't know how to. Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone except me. His voice was ice and steel. I'm 10 minutes away. Clara, listen to me. You're not alone anymore. Do you understand? You're not alone. She understood. Finally, terribly, she understood that some battles couldn't be won with pride. James moved them to a safe house that night. A luxury apartment in a building he owned, security on every floor. He explained the threat with clinical precision. The Borellis, a rival family attempting expansion, had identified Clara and Adele as leverage. He'd already positioned protection. They'd be safe. For 2 weeks they were. Then the preschool's winter showcase happened. Clara had argued against going, but Adele had practiced her art presentation for weeks, and James assured her the venue would be secure. Marcus and 2 other men positioned throughout the small auditorium. Eyes everywhere, but not in the hallway where Adele went to use the bathroom. Clara was watching the first presentation when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We have the girl. Come outside alone or she dies screaming. The world collapsed into a single point of terror. She was already moving toward the exit when James's hand caught her arm. His face deadly calm as he read the message over her shoulder. Marcus, he said quietly into his radio, they have Adele. Lock down the building. No one leaves. Then, to Clara, stay here. Like hell. I will bring her back. His eyes were black ice. But you need to let me do what I do. Clara watched him walk out, followed by Marcus and 3 men who'd materialized from nowhere, and understood with terrible clarity that she was about to witness exactly who James D. Burns really was. She followed anyway. The parking lot was nearly empty. A white van idled near the back fence. Through her phone, she heard James's voice, cold and conversational. You have 10 seconds to return the child before I demonstrate why people fear my name. Laughter from the van. A man emerged, holding Adele against his chest, her face tear-streaked and terrified. The Borellis want to negotiate. James moved. Clara had never seen violence executed with such precise brutality. One moment he was standing still. The next, the man was on the ground, James's knee on his throat. Adele pulled free into Marcus's arms. Two other men who'd emerged from the van went down before they could raise weapons, James's movements economical and lethal, each strike designed to incapacitate instantly. It took 17 seconds. "Who sent you?" James's voice was conversational, his hand around the man's throat. When he didn't answer fast enough, something in James's grip shifted and the man screamed. "Borelli! Michael Borelli! Please! Tell Michael he has 24 hours to leave my city." James leaned closer. "Or I'll make his entire family disappear. Starting with him. Do you understand?" The man nodded frantically. James stood, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked calmly to where Marcus held Adele. He took her gently, his hands, the same hands that had just dealt calculated violence, cradling her like she was made of glass. "You're safe now," he murmured against her hair. "I've got you." Clara watched this man, this dangerous, violent, terrifying man, hold her daughter with infinite gentleness, and understood the truth she'd been fighting. He wasn't dangerous despite being her protector. He was the ultimate protector because he was dangerous, and she'd been a fool to think she could keep Adele safe from his world when only his world could truly protect her. They stayed at the safe house for 3 more days while James dismantled the Borelli operation with surgical precision. Clara didn't ask for details. She heard enough in his clipped phone conversations, saw enough in the exhaustion around his eyes, understood enough from the way Marcus reported that the problem has been permanently resolved. Adele had nightmares the first 2 nights, waking with screams that brought both Clara and James running. On the 3rd night, she crawled into James's lap while he worked on his laptop and fell asleep against his chest, her small hand fisted in his shirt like an anchor. Clara watched from the doorway as the silent CEO carefully saved his work with one hand, the other wrapped protectively around her daughter, and felt something in her chest crack open. "I can't go back to normal," she said quietly when Adele was tucked into bed. "Can I? After this, knowing what's out there, knowing I can't protect her from..." Her voice broke. James stood from the couch, crossed to where she stood, and took both her hands. "No. You can't." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a tarnished copper penny. "But you don't have to." Clara stared at the coin, Adele's payment, carried for weeks in a billionaire's pocket. "Your daughter hired me for a specific job," James said quietly. "To marry you. To make you smile again. I accepted her contract, but I'm asking you to accept mine." He held the penny between them. This was her down payment on a lifetime of protection. "Let me make it official. Let me give you my name, my resources, my world. Not as charity. As partnership. As..." He stopped, something vulnerable crossing his face. "As love, if you'll have it. You love me." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm working on it," he said, echoing his words from the pizza restaurant. "But I'm a very dedicated worker. Despite everything, the fear, the violence, the impossibility of it all," Clara laughed, then cried, then said the word that changed everything. "Yes." The next morning, Adele found them at the breakfast table, Clara wearing a simple diamond ring, sitting close enough to James that their shoulders touched. "Did you marry my mom?" Adele asked, eyes wide. "Working on it," James said. "But I made her a promise. Official this time." Adele looked at her mother's face, at the genuine smile, the lightness in her eyes, the way she leaned into James without fear, and nodded with deep satisfaction. "Good," she said. "That's what the penny was for. Mission accomplished. 1 copper penny. 1 impossible contract. 1 family made whole. Before you go, hit that like button, subscribe to join our growing family of story lovers, and drop your country in the comments. Let's see where our stories are reaching today."